All right. We are live. Welcome to another live stream here at Revero 311. I'm Revero 311, and I'm going to be joined by my two friends, fellow reenactors, amateur historians, living historians. Andrew, if you want to go first, introduce yourself, and then Ben.
Yeah, so if you've been around the channel, you've seen me a few times. I'm Andrew Dixon. I've been doing 18th century reenacting for 10, 11 years now, mostly portraying militia in the South. Currently, I'm the captain of the Lincoln County Militia, so look us up on Facebook to see where we're going to be at next, also on Instagram. And we also do British light infantry with the Light Company 15th Regiment of Foot.
My name is Ben Starnes. I'm also been reenacting in the South, portraying militia primarily for about 4 or 5 years now. My focus is mainly in arms and armor of the 18th century, so long rifles, building long rifles is my big thing. But I'm also the sergeant of the Lincoln County Militia and do the British light infantry thing as well.
Awesome. So, yeah, if you've been around the channel, you've seen these guys. If you're not, it's going to be a good conversation. Today, we're going to be talking about how patriots fought in the American Revolution. That's from militia service all the way over to Continental service. Just kind of general overviews, sort of the one-stop shop if you've ever had any basic questions about the Continental Army. Obviously, to start off, I don't consider myself an expert. Maybe you guys do, but just basically covering the history of the Continental Army from 1775 through all of its trials and tribulations, and ending in 1783 with the disbandment of the Continental Army. And actually, here's our first trivia question. Who was the last member of the Continental Army, if either of you know?
The Marquis?
No. Andy?
I ain't got a clue.
So I read this in a book. The last member of the Continental Army is actually George Washington.
Okay.
So he his final act as commander-in-chief of the Continental Army is to disband it, and then he rides to Philadelphia to turn in his commission. And I read that in the book, and it almost made me tear up. So I don't know if that's technically true, because don't they go into the American Legion, or there's two battalions right after the end of the war? They get stood up, or they're held around for garrison force.
Yeah, there's something that's held old a little bit later, but yeah, the Continental Armies itself didn't exist.
And so I know that there was at least some military forces around for the Whiskey Rebellion, and a little bit later during Washington's presidency, Anthony Wayne took several forces up into what we know is now Indiana, Ohio, to fight Native Americans. But I did not know that about Washington.
Almost a Miracle, I think, is the name of the book. But yeah, that's what the author ends with. It's just a good story. So I like a good story. Just like Ton Tavern might not have been the actual recruiting spot of the Marine Corps. I'm learning about a lot of Marine Corps history at the moment.
Oh,
So
what?
we're going to be.
Ton Tavern isn't the original crayon box.
I am currently working on this video that will release for the 250th, but it's Ton Tavern, whose proprietor is Samuel Nicholas. And then there's another Marine captain that owns the Conestoga Wagon that's right down the road. So both of those might be considered the birthplace of the Continental Marines. And yeah, so that's because I'm trying to pin that down. So I'll make sure to have the ability to not dedicate myself to one comment. So this video, we're going to be going over the early war army. So the initial rush to the arms in 1775 into 1776. How many thousands and tens of thousands of patriots, Americans, went to grab arms to fight the British. And then you kind of have the long war, if you will. So from 77, 78, 79, 80. And then you kind of see the numbers fluctuate. You have your transitions. The army goes into Valley Forge. Everyone's favorite screaming German shows up, and he brings around some not reformation. I don't know. You guys were talking reforms, and then we'll end with the professional force that goes out, fights at the Battle of Monmouth, and goes all the way to the end of the war. this is a live stream, so feel free if you have any questions at any time through this live stream, you can drop them and we'll engage with you guys as well. This is meant to be a kind of like a back and forth as much as it is us going through our topic of discussion. So we'll start with this. Drop in the chat, would you have enlisted in 1775, knowing the terms were only for a year, or would you have waited until 1778? It says we have 4 people here. So, Andy, you are up first. Would you have enlisted in 1775, not knowing how the war ends?
I mean, I'm going to stick with kind of what my family did, and you know, a lot of them, they stayed out in the mountains of Virginia where they were at least the branches of my family that were here at the time. You know, they were in the middle of nowhere, and you know, they did their militia service, you know, as would be required by law, but they don't really get involved until the Shawnee come to them, because I mean, that's their number one priority. You know, why would they go fight in a New England war when you've got the Shawnee in the backyard that, you know, have already proven themselves a dangerous enemy to leave your wife and children behind with. So I'm going to say no, because of, you know, where I'm at and where my family was time, living in the backcountry, you know, middle of nowhere.
And that's pretty consistent with like a lot of the history of that too. A lot of, especially those western counties and the states that touch the Appalachians on the frontier, you're not draining your manpower to go, like you said, fight it's more of a regional war at that point. You don't know if the country's you don't know that the colonies are going to end up declaring independence for sure. They do send the riflemen up, but Ben.
I don't think I'm going to enlist either. Again, I'm sticking with more of what my family did. My family were farmers, and as a matter of fact, they're still farming the same pieces of land now that they were farming in 1776 or 75. So I'm going to. We're not far from major cities. Salisbury's 13 miles from both those places, but no. I mean, kind of like Dixon said, it's a regional war at that point. I have farming to do, I have money to make, and I have a family to support. So, and at that time, for both of my families, it was, well, excuse me, for one side of my mom's family, it was a brand new place. He had bought the land in 1775 because for some reason they got real mad at loyalists and started selling off land, and he picked up 300 acres there. So no, I would stay and build my farm and, you know, wait till the war to come to me, or wait. So I hope that I don't ever have to fight. Now that bunch did do their militia service. He was a sergeant in the militia, and he was at Moore's Creek, but no, I would have not enlisted in a Continental Army.
So I guess that I have a question about farming. So you farm then?
Yes, yeah. That's why that's probably why I'm going to have to kick out a little early again, is because this is harvest season. We had a combine go down yesterday, so if Dad sends me a text, I'm going to go and help work on a combine. Yeah, we still farm. We raise goats and cows and sheep, and we don't raise sheep, goats and cows and chickens, and yeah. We are a nice little farm here.
So I was talking about Andy before he went live. I was just going over the Battle of Brandywine, and leading up to Brandywine, it's either the colony, well, in the state of Pennsylvania, actually requested to release their militia to go plant their winter wheat. So yeah. When is winter wheat? Do you know much about the harvesting cycle?
Yeah, so wheat, especially at that time, was planted around anywhere from mid-October to mid-November, same as it's planted now. You harvest about March, April. So the growing season for that wheat is it grows all summer, and then it'll die in mid-March. And so you usually have to wait a few weeks for it to dry. And then what you would do, most of the time, it would be gangs of workmen. So you would have 20 or 30 guys, and it might be the surrounding farms. They'd all get together, and you'd have this guy's field and this guy's field and this guy's field and this guy's field. And you would all go and you would take scythes and you scythe the wheat, and then you would have people come behind you and bundle it into bundles, and then you would thrash it, which means that you thrashing, you hit it and took all the wheat berries off the stem, Then you have winnowing, and winnowing was you would lay it on a flat surface, and wind would blow across it and blow the chaff and the nasty bits away, and you would have a big chunk of what was left was grain, was wheat, and then from there you took it to the flour mill and it was ground, and then you have flour. So that's how at least small grain, wheat, barley, oats, that's how that was done.
Do we know? I mean, this is obviously a generalization, but for say if you're in the militia, you're going back to your homestead, how much would like a single family farm? How much could you realistically expect just a family to farm? Because it's all it's independent families, right? Scattered across the countryside, or
Well,
go ahead.
I'll say I can jump in a little bit on the families here. If my family that's up in that was up around Bristol, Virginia area, it was yeah, to us nowadays it would look very scattered, but 50 100 acres up there, and then you've got the next guy and his farm is butts up to yours, and then so on and so forth. So yeah, it looks scattered to us, yet nowadays when we're used to seeing subdivisions and neighborhoods and cities. But there, yeah, that's pretty close neighbors, at least in that part of the country. Now, then Ben can speak a little more on the Piedmont of North Carolina.
And so the Piedmont is where you start to have plantations. So I won't go as far as the majority of what was grown here was cash crops, because it wasn't, but there were still a good chunk of cash crops being grown here. In Rowan County specifically, you had a lot of tobacco. You had some cotton, not much, and most of that cotton was saved for homesteads. Had some linen, or had some flax. So, but what a single family was expected to, or could do, it depended on the family, because you had like one side of my family had 4 kids, then the other side had 13. So obviously the side with 13 could farm, and they did. They farmed about 1,000 acres. Now, or excuse me, they owned about 1,000 acres. They farmed about 300. And that was, from the records I'm finding, was mainly small grain, some tobacco, some corn, and the other side of the family was the Irish immigrants, or Scotch Irish immigrants. They were farming almost exclusively grain, and that was being sold. And during during the war, they were selling to the armies. So, say what a single family is expected to do depends on the family, depends on how much land you have, depends on how many kids you have, and during this time depends on if you have enough money for slaves. Because let's not shy away from it. Slavery was a part of farming.
it all kind of goes more into the economics of the time as well. Like if we started off the discussion talking about would you join the Continental Army, and if so, for how long? Well, it's hard to leave if you're working the farm and leaving your wife and kids, or leaving your family. It's easier. It's a young man's game, as you could say, for going off and joining the infantry. We do see a lot of laborers join the Continental Army, at least throughout the war. Like the kind of like that's a consistent manpower pool, and it makes sense, right? I was just reading about the French Army, the 7 Years' War. The British Army has some of the same sort of cadre of people that come in. So like a day laborer, or somebody that's just entering crafts. So
yeah,
like a cobbler's apprentices, people that aren't young men, they're not as well established. So those are the kinds of people that can pick up and leave and join the service. So talking about the early Continental Army, so the Continental Army is stood up in June of 1775. The first action they do is to call in to service 10 rifle companies, 6 from Maryland, 2 from, I always mess this math up, 6 from Maryland, 2 from Virginia, 6 from Pennsylvania, 2 from Maryland, 2 from Virginia. And do we know why North Carolina? Since you guys are my North Carolina experts. Because North Carolina has riflemen, so does South Carolina.
South Carolina, I don't know as much about. North Carolina, it's very similar to when we did raise Continental regiments. We tended to just kind of keep our guys as close as possible to North Carolina.
Yeah. You look in this area. North Carolina gets the short end of the stick a lot. So the riflemen that they did have tended to move with the regiments. So you would have riflemen moving with the 2nd, moving with the 6th, North Carolina, acting like they did, in the rifle companies, acting as scouts, acting as a lot of time as hunters. They help provide for the regiments. But in battle, they were a lot of the times you would have North Carolina riflemen out of each out of each regiment would form some sort of an ad hoc rifle company and would fight like the rifle regiments up north. And then they would form most of the time on the left flank or get behind cover and fight as riflemen, give them Indian play.
I know the 8th Virginia and I think the 9th Virginia also, when they were raised as state regiments, had rifle companies in their organizational table. So that seems to be pretty common with the South. That's probably because they had guys with rifles instead of telling them to go find a musket. You could hire a gun and help fill out organizationally. So it's interesting. So Continental Army starts in June of 75. George Washington, a couple days later, he is the first and only commander-in-chief of the entire Revolutionary War. He heads up and takes over, and their first enlistments are for a year. I think I read it. I already forgot what it was. But you read the enlistment for the Continental Army in the first year is you will abide by all rules and regulations, and you'll be loyal up to a year. And that's one of the first problems that the Continental Army is going to have. It has this massive wave of people coming in. They actually have no problems really filling out the regiments. Continental Congress sets aside. I guess I should take a step back. The army that had the militia forces that had engaged the British at Lexington and Concord, that pushed them all the way back, and also Bunker Hill, that was called the New England Army of Observation. They're the ones that are hemming in the British and Boston. That army of observation, will be the core in which the Continental Army is built off of. To make it a continental-wide effort, Congress assigns regiments per quota of population. So depending on the population of your state is how many regiments you're expected to provide to the Continental Army. Continental Army meaning they will serve on the continent. So you're talking about North Carolina, like you join up to protect North Carolina, and now you're all the way up in New England. So I've just listened to a great podcast about the 8th Virginia, and they actually joined up into the state regiment as Muhlenberg, the Puritan minister, and on their march down to South Carolina, they actually had Virginians deserting because we didn't join this to go fight in South Carolina. We joined this to protect Virginia. So it's kind of like a through line of trying to get.
And North Carolina did see some of the same problem later. As far as like Continentals being put over North Carolina militia, it was pretty vehemently fought against. It's like, no, we're not going to do that. We're fighting for North Carolina, and we're going to fight for North Carolina in North Carolina. And then I think, if I remember right, there was some Spanish help that showed up in Wilmington, and then we even had North Carolina militia and some Continentals show up down there in case the Spanish decided to get squirrely on the coast again. Because a lot of those guys, while they weren't the generation that fought the Spanish incursion in the Southport, they were their sons and grandsons. So it's like, yeah, we still don't trust these guys a whole lot.
Do you want to speak on North Carolina militia service as per the law? Or do you?
So
you know the law better than I do.
So North Carolina militia, at the start of the war, North Carolina is two states that nominally get along when we have to fight somebody else. So you have Eastern North Carolina, Western North Carolina. They're separated by the fault line. The Piedmont and the mountains are in the west of the fault line, basically where elevation goes from 800 feet average to about 8 feet average in a few miles. So all the rivers have rapids. So there's not a good way to get there from here. Really until the modern interstate system, there's not a great way to get out there.
And you'll notice we still don't like them.
Yeah, so I mean that divide does go a lot. One of the more fun ways nowadays is looking at barbecue. Eastern North Carolina, Western North Carolina. There's a reason there's two different styles, is because there's two different groups of people in the state of North Carolina. So the Eastern North Carolina guys, you see a lot of them kind of following the model that Virginia does, and then Western North Carolina falls closer to South Carolina because our closest port is still to this day Charleston, where we are at. So North Carolina militia service at the time of the start of the war falls under the 1768 militia laws. So you have to provide yourself a good serviceable firelock, and that can be rifle, Fowler, trade guns, surplus musket, whatever. You have to have 9 cartridges or 9 charges of powder and ball or swan shot, good for the bore of your gun. And then you have to have like a cartridge box to put them in, and a bladed weapon. So it says either like a bayonet, a sword, a long knife. Tomahawks actually aren't mentioned specifically until a little bit later.
So if I'm not mistaken, the 68 specifically mentions hangers as a preferred, not a requirement, but a preferred.
Well, no, it mentions some kind of bladed weapon. It says hanger, sword, bayonet, or I think long knife.
Yeah.
I can pull it. I'd have to pull it up. But that's what it is, and then from there you're going to need stuff like a blanket. Hang on, let me actually find it because it should be fairly close at hand. Because I keep that hot dog. That
Hey,
means
43rd. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. I was gonna say, hey, 43rd Virginia, welcome. Also, welcome to anyone else. If you have any questions, drop them in the comment section, as we're just talking about the Continental Army and making our way through the history from 75 to 83. Sorry, Andy.
Yep. So here we go. This is from Doc South, which is a great resource if you're looking for anything in the Carolinas from colonial small political dealings and legal dealings all the way up through modern day. It's through the North Carolina University system. It's absolutely marvelous. But it says in arms and be provided with a well-fixed gun, provide a cartouche box, sword, cutlass, or hanger, and have at least 9 charges of powder made into cartridges, and sizable bullets or swan shot, 3 spare flints, worm, and pricker. So, I mean, it's just the basic stuff to make your gun work, and then on top of that, you're going to need stuff like a blanket, knapsack, which, I mean, again, those are going to be more to keep the person in function than anything. And then there are 2 updates to the North Carolina militia laws, and the 77 is the first update. It's a lot of the same stuff. I think they do include tomahawks, and that's when you start to see stuff like blankets and knapsacks written in, if memory serves. And then by the 1781 revision, it's actually one of the few I see militia mentioned as supposed to be carrying haversacks.
Mm-hmm.
But it's basically show up with a gun, a knife, and a haversack to eat with, and that's about it. It's just we need get guys in the field as trimmed down as you need to as you have to have for it to function. So that's kind of the overview of the militia laws. Every man 16 to 60 is expected to serve, and then it's broken down into your first level is going to be your company. So one of my ancestors, Captain John Starnes, and actually one of Ben's, both of us kind of it's a collateral ancestor. He was a captain of a militia company out of Mecklenburg County, and so the company is going to be your immediate area, and I mean it might be 20 to 50 guys, and they're going to elect their officers. They're supposed to meet and drill once a month, and each one of these things, if a requirement, comes with a fine. Then the next level up, once a quarter, you're supposed to join all of these companies together with the regiment. So instead of just being like saying Starnes' company, or ironically enough, we didn't know this when we planned it, but there actually was a captain of a company in the Lincoln County Militia. His last name was Dixon. So it's not just Captain Dixon's company. Now it's okay, the Lincoln County or the Mecklenburg County Regiment of Militia. And then after that, it was supposed to be, I think, either once a year or twice a year. So like those quarterly ones, and then once a year, twice a year, you would go to the next level up, which would be the brigade or the district, which for both of us,
With
me
the
over here,
Salisbury district.
yeah, I was gonna say me out here in what at the time would have been Tryon County, yeah, Tryon County, to him up in Rowan would have been Salisbury district. So you join up there, and if memory serves, you don't see that a lot from 68 until basically 75, when everybody's going, okay, everything's looking like it's about to get a little squirrely. We need to start taking this a little more seriously, guys. And then you see them actually have those larger militia musters, and it's not just drill. And matter of fact, in October of this year, we're going to be doing an event to set up a company drill for a militia company muster. And it's a social time, so people are bringing their families out. They're coming out to, you see references to women having cooking competitions amongst themselves. You see shooting competitions, tomahawk throwing, which, while it's not a tactic in war, it's still something interesting to pass the time. They're sitting jury to hear trial, and they're doing stuff like public works projects. They're working on roads. So some of the stuff we're going to be doing is going to be stuff like site improvements. So we're going to be helping clear trails, and the plan is to have like a mock trial, especially the drill, and kind of show that there's more to militia life than march around and shoot the bad guys.
And this is kind of like the caveat. It's interesting to talk about. You said the name of the captain for the company. Nowadays, you talk about Alpha Company, Bravo, Charlie Delta, but back in the 18th century, they would say Dixon's company, Starnes's company, Johnson's company, and that's a big difference from the 18th century to modern day. And do you want to expand of why they use the naming difference? I've read a couple of things that it's the company commanders that are in charge with raising, equipping, training the men. I think you even see that in von Steuben. If you say I'm in the second company, like it makes it actually kind of hard to know which company you're in or which regiment you're in. I've read in some pension applications from the 18 teens or whatever that they're actually still using the captain, the last name of the captain's company that they fought in when applying. That's just always threw me off. It's like, how do you even know
Well,
Captain Johnson's company? Who even is this guy?
well, these guys are electing their own officers as well.
Okay.
So yeah, they're the militia laws, they furnish for the election of a captain of the company, sergeants, lieutenant if need be, and again, you can look up the militia laws for your state in your state or your colony, or at least one of the original 13, and you can see what they're furnished for to elect officers. But these guys, that's part of the thing of it being a very regional, very local thing. These guys are electing their own officers. So that's part of the reason you further identify with your own company. It's like, okay, well, I'm with the Lincoln County Militia. Okay, cool. Now you can further identify that of, oh, I'm with Captain Dixon's company or Captain Starnes' company with Mecklenburg or Locke or whoever.
And so Locke is a perfect example for that, because you see Locke's militia throughout the war, from 75 to 83. However, there's more than one Locke. John Locke is the guy who is commanding it for the majority of it, but his brother Benjamin Locke also commands it. And it's just because they're elected, different times. I think his name's Benjamin. He has a brother who was also Francis. Sorry, yeah, it was a John and Francis. You're right. But you had Francis Locke, who commanded it for the majority of the year, or the majority of the war. But before that, his brother was commanding it, and it was like halfway through the war, they just had an election, and they just elected a new guy. Something else you see every now and then, and I've seen it once or twice with my mom's family, Sergeant John Silliman with the Mecklenburg County Militia. He lived in Rowan County. Again, lived 13 miles from Salisbury. So sometimes you'll see some friendships that may extend across county lines. You'll have, from what we can find, he was just a friend of the captain of that company. So he went and served under him and was able, and through some legal way, was able to fulfill his militia service. But and knew enough people that he was elected as that company's captain or as that company's sergeant.
And then one guy that I'm trying to read up on, because a few people have asked me to do a portrayal of him for the 250th, is Benjamin Cleveland. And one of the things about Cleveland is he starts off in a different company, or in a different, like a lieutenant in a different company, and then he ends up as a colonel of Burke County Militia. So I mean that's going to be effectively your command structure is, your companies are going to have captains, lieutenant, sergeant, whatever's need be, and then if you have a particularly large one, okay, maybe a major, but then when you put the regiment together, that's when you're going to get your colonels, your lieutenant colonels, and your majors mostly.
And the company commanders are responsible for acquiring arms for their men. Do we know much about the man
militia?
shows up?
The militia law, it depends on where you're at, and it depends on how much money there is. So North Carolina, you're fined if you show up without a gun. So you're supposed to have your own. That's part of your duty to be a militiaman, and unless there's just absolutely some reason and you're so destitute that you can't buy a firelock.
Which in October we're planning on showing if we have enough people.
Mm-hmm.
You're gonna find somebody.
Oh, we've got it found. Yeah.
Yeah, you would levy fines if you didn't show up, because I mean, again, that's part of your duty as a citizen. That's part of your duty as a subject of the crown, is to be able to serve in the militia for the common defense.
Yeah, it was the Virginia Militia Act of 1755 has a great comment. Every person listed to serve in the foot, appearing at such muster without a firelock well fixed and a bayonet fitted to the same, shall pay 3 shillings for every such failure, and every such person appearing at such muster as foresaid, without a cutting sword, double cartouche box, and 3 charges of powder and ball, shall pay 3 shillings for every such failure. I've also read that the county was responsible for providing the firearms as well. They could levy a tax to help import firearms or pay for firearms for the militia, because in Virginia the militias ran at the county level, so they would organize within that county, and then you would muster on the grid.
And that's how North Carolina was, is that you would have county regiments.
Yeah.
But because you have, for example, Rowan County, you have Salisbury. Okay, your Salisbury companies, they're all going to be fairly close. Lincoln County, or what at the time would be Tryon County. Tryon County, before it was split up into Lincoln and others, it runs literally to the Mississippi River.
Technically.
Yeah, we're technically speaking to the Mississippi River, but it runs to the Proclamation line. So you've got these guys in these small settlements out here in the middle of nowhere. So it's kind of hard to have every time show up as the regimental in North Carolina. It's everything's very straight out. And on what you were saying there with the 5 shilling or 4 shillings, in the 68 law, it says, be provided with a well-fixed gun, shall forfeit and pay, if at a private muster 5 shillings, and if a general muster 10 shillings. So yeah, you're fined if you don't show up with a gun, and a lot of those fines are going to be used to provide the things necessary for militia service. And there would be, sometimes you see pikes, sometimes you see
sticks.
Sticks being used for, so that way they can still drill, and then, or sometimes you just see basically people able to rent a gun.
And there were people who just would plain refuse to show up. My favorite reference is a gunsmith that was working in Salem, or supposed to be working in Salem. It wasn't actually doing anything, but he refused to show up for militia service. And when they came to him and asked him, "All right, dude, you have to do this." By this time the war was on. you have to come. That you're defending your home, you're defending your family, you're defending your faith. Come fight with us. And he was like, no. I'm like, why? He goes, because who's going to fix your guns when you break them? Just the most smart aleck answer you could think of. But that was the mentality of quite a few of these guys. There's records of farmers who wouldn't show up. And why didn't you show up? Because I had to get corn in, or because I had to get barley in. So you see that.
Going over 1776 is the first year in which the new organization really goes through. I think they approve it in the late fall 75, and there's that great quote where Washington says we disband an army they're outside of the siege of Boston. They disband and reorganize the army, and then they have set amount of regiments, brigadier generals, major generals, all the political issues of the day. And that's the army that goes and fights at the Battle of Long Island. And what do we know from the first engagements of the Continental Army? Any real standouts in that for 1776 year?
Other than Washington getting completely steamrolled at Long Island? No, not really.
Well, he gets flanked. Why would you Jamaica Pass?
Well, and part of it is, and I think ultimately the culmination of these strategies happens later at Brandywine. But throughout the early war, America seems to want to try to recreate Breed's Hill or Bunker Hill. They want to set up a reinforced defensive position in a place where the British have to throw themselves at the works. And the British may win, but it's going to be a Pyrrhic victory. So that's what it seems they want. And I think like I said, the ultimate culmination of that is the next year in 77 at Brandywine, where Washington and his army are set up, to face these armies that are going to come across at that he believes are going to come across at Chad's Ford. And what's the other ford they were guarding? They were going to hold them. They were going to hold them there and actually, attempt to make them charge the works. And then Cornwallis comes around the flank with his men, and it's a scene that played itself over multiple times throughout the war.
And that's also when those 1-year enlistments are now ending, right? By the time leading up to around Brandywine, I mean, that's the whole Trenton and Princeton debacle, not debacle, leading up to Trenton.
Well, Brandywine's September of the next year. It's 77.
Yeah.
77. Oh, I'm getting
that's the Philadelphia campaign.
Yeah, I mean the 10 days I think is really one of the only times that you don't see Washington trying to create somewhat of a defensive position for the Brits to throw themselves against. Trenton was very obviously that was an offensive attack if there ever was one. Princeton was as well, or it was more of a guarding attack, if you will. I mean, he was responding to the British. He was responding to the British's response. It was a counterattack.
Well, it was an attack attempting to try to press forward to a supply depot. He attacked an outpost, and it's like, okay, well, we know they're going to respond to that, so it's like, okay, well, let's draw them in here and go around them so we can hit the outpost.
And he had a lot of his men were coming up on the end of their enlistments.
Yeah, so
he asks them to stay for Princeton, right? Like, just hold on, just give me one more battle.
Yeah, he's like, basically, give me one more battle, and and if anybody there chooses to go home, sure. And they absolutely, they shellac the Hessians under, was it Rawl? Yeah, Colonel Rawl at Trenton, and then they shellac, a column of British regulars at Princeton, a few days later, and that does kind of revive the morale. And it's one of the few times I think anything of Washington's ever went exactly to plan.
Yeah.
And even Princeton, I'll go with, it didn't even go exactly to plan. Part of it is the fact that Washington did have that command presence on the field to rally after Mercer's killed.
Yeah, this is pretty. So this is 30th of December of 1776. So this is after the victory at Trenton, and this is before Princeton. And he says he has he will pay them 6 weeks' pay beyond their term of enlistment, which was to have expired the last day of this month. So expires the 31st of December, 1776. He says, I will give them an extra bounty to keep them on. And then he has the quote about the brave fellows holding on. He's like, my brave fellows, you have done all I asked you to do, but your country is at stake. If you will consent to stay 1 month longer, you will render that service to the cause of liberty and to your country, which you probably can never do under any such circumstances. And that's part of the 10 crucial days. And then they go forth and they win the Battle of Princeton. So,
And
from an organizational, go ahead, you want.
I was gonna say a good point off of these relatively short enlistments though that you see comes back to help later in the war, because a lot of these guys, the North Carolina militia that stood at Camden and fought, a lot of those guys, and by that point in time, a fair chunk of these militiamen are coming back from Continental service, so they've had that experience of functioning as a regular army, of standing toe to toe with the British, and being able to drill and be professional, and then they're bringing that back to their home county militias. So you see them definitely increase the effectiveness of the militia later on in the South.
I hadn't really thought about that. Yeah, that's a great point to make. Yeah, it's also reducing the cost on the Continental Army and Continental Congress to maintain a force in the field. You're able to train your men up, send them home, which is going to help out your militia regiments by providing experience. If I remember correctly, a lot of the officers commanding militia units at Guilford Courthouse are former Continental Line as well.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like
Yeah.
I've heard that.
I mean, a great example would be Francis Marion's militia. At Utah Springs, there are writings from British officers praising them, saying that they were firing in ranks as the best Prussian troops, and they were also using the combined arm tactics. I mean, they had a rifle company that was actually firing in volleys, and they had guys armed with smooth bores out front firing, quote, as the best Prussian troops.
And
all of which were ex-Continentals.
Yeah, and at Guilford Courthouse, you have, people love to give the North Carolina militia at Guilford a bad rap. And you start reading from the British side, once they engage, what we know on the Continental or the American side is the North Carolina militia. They talk about coming under an absolute, like a murderous volley. So these guys are firing a couple of shots, but those shots are hitting their mark and they're doing what they need to do, and then they shoot scoot.
General rule of militia: when pointy things go on the end of the gun, you get out of there.
And they were getting. Go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, or when it's just not fun anymore because there's a real chance you might die, and then you can't farm if you're dead.
Yeah.
There's after the war, Knox. See if I can. You guys talk. I'll see if I can find this, but basically it breaks up how many Americans actually served in the Continental Army. But there's a large turnover rate, right? Where a guy will serve a year, or soldier he'll serve a year, he'll end, and he'll come back in a later year, or maybe he'll do just 1 year and then he'll leave the service. So the men at the end of the war are not the same guys at the beginning of the war in general. Mm-hmm. Again, all of this is said in general, as with anything. You can find somebody else.
You do see, that is one thing you see about the militia, and especially those who stay with the militia, is for us, the guys who start the war in 75, or for North Carolina, the guys who are going down in to fight the Snow Campaign, the first siege in 96 down in South Carolina, which is coming up November of this year. And then the men who are fighting at Moores Creek Bridge, those are the same guys who are fighting at the end of the war. So by 1780, when the war comes back south, you've got men that have fought. They fought in, some of them possibly in Savannah in 96, Moores Creek, some of the actions out east, You've got the Rutherford Trace in '76 going through and removing the issue of the Cherokee that are going to side with the British. So by 1780, these guys get down here, and their primary goal is still not to be a soldier. So that's part of the reason the militia turning to flight. But you still have an army of guys who are well acquainted with where they're at and can absolutely make you hurt in the right situations, and especially demonstrated at places like Cowpens, at Kings Mountain, Guilford Courthouse, where these militias would absolutely make the British pay for every inch of ground they took. And then also, some of the other stuff in militia is, in the southern campaign, the British basically held the land that they garrisoned and the land they were marching on. So, if they left an area ungarrisoned or, their supply lines, you had guys like Pickens, Sumter, Francis Marion, guys like that would run roughshod over them if they didn't actively garrison. So that's part of the ultimate benefit of the militia that you don't necessarily see on the battle lines is, they're wreaking havoc on
Supplies.
on supplies and infrastructure. Deprive the enemy of nice things, and he has a hard time fighting a war.
Yeah. And another thing that the Brits were suffering from when they were coming through South Carolina and the Piedmont of North Carolina, there was a big chunk of that army that were Germans, that were Hessians and Hessian Jaegers and just Hessian regulars, and they were coming through. And this area is a lot of the time settled by German people, and we have accounts of them seeing a pretty German girl in the field and just saying, "This war is stupid. That pretty German girl isn't." And they, there was not mass desertions, but there's a big chunk of the German contingent that just up and leaves. Like the first gold rush in American history is Reed Gold Mine. The guy who owned the place where that chunk of gold was found that started the gold rush was an ex-Hessian that deserted during the war. And you see Hessians that are even switching sides. Not so much
in
in Southern
Pennsylvania
campaign.
too.
Yeah, you see it a lot in Pennsylvania.
Is it so? How many Hessians served in the war? Like 40,000. I've heard
a bunch.
Yeah, it was a bunch.
I mean, a good third of the British forces in the Americas were Hessians.
And I absolutely hate when people say, "Oh, they were mercenaries." No, they were not mercenaries.
Especially the ones from Hesse.
But I say they weren't mercenaries. They were the armies of these German princes in the Holy Roman Empire. Yes, the prince may have been paid off to send them, but these men were not soldiers they were not soldiers for hire themselves. They were not mercenaries by what we would think of mercenary today, especially.
So especially the guys who came from Hanover, because I mean this issue tends to be glossed over. George III was still the king of Hanover. They still had land in Germany, so they were using German forces from Hanover over here too.
Well, I mean, he's a German king than anything.
By that point, he's not so much German.
He's a German king. He's not a Stuart.
Wasn't Italian.
Compared to the professional force, so the Americans have these problems with enlistments, 1 year, 2 year, 3 year. What do we know the enlistments for? I've never actually looked into the Hessians too much. I try to keep it to the Continental side. The British, how long are their enlistments for?
Yes.
Yes.
You join the British Army.
Yeah.
Yeah, but see, until you're not not effective to fight anymore a lot of times. So it's not like nowadays where you join in for however long your duration of contract. No, these guys are joining the British Army, and
when the British Army says we're done with you, they're done with you. But until then, you're theirs.
Yeah, and it's also not like modern military where if you're in and you don't screw up, okay, you'll go from private PFC or lance corporal, sergeant, whatever. Unless there was a need for a sergeant, you'd have guys that were in 20, 25 years as a private soldier, and that's it. That was all they ever were.
So after, I always say so. I'll have to cut that out. The 88 Battalion Resolve, bringing it back to the organization of the Continental Army. 88 Battalion Resolve in 1776 that marked a shift to longer enlistments, 3 years, or the duration of the war. This provides George Washington the ability to really build that professional fighting force. He's able to maintain experience within the regiments at the enlisted, NCO, and officer level. If you think about it, there's a lot of benefits to that just for having. Now you can promote NCOs from within that started off as a private. They can become a corporal, a sergeant, and sergeant majors are later in the war. So for 3 years or the duration of the war, that's going to depend. I think it depends on your state, right?
Can I be
Virginia,
pedantic real quick for a second?
Sorry?
Can I be
Oh, yeah.
pedantic? It's not sergeant
Okay.
majors. It's sergeants major.
Sergeants major. Okay.
That's the plural.
Sergeants. Oh, mate.
Yeah, if you have more than one, they're sergeants major.
I'll take it. I'm all about the I don't even know what the word is. How do you say
Pedantry. Pedantic. Or
Pedantic.
pedantic.
As somebody that has a little bit of an aneurysm whenever I hear the word Charlottesville, or I've been hearing Charlottesville, which is a town.
That's a totally different place.
You say Charlottesville was a real place. Let's be fair.
Charlottesville's the name of the town in France. Charlottesville is a town in Virginia.
Well, Charlotte, North Carolina was referred to as Charlottesville during the time period too.
Mostly Charlottetown, but yeah.
I've seen Charlottetown. I've seen Charlottesville. I've seen Charlottesburg before. For some reason, Germans use that one.
Yeah. But back to what we were saying there, the 88 Battalion Resolve.
88 Battalion Resolve of 88 regiments. Americans, we kind of follow the British tradition. This is the biggest thing that always got my brain. What is a battalion and what is a regiment? Because if you even read the Declaration to create the Continental Marines, it says two battalions of Marines to be raised. I'm like, why do I see this? And it says inconsistency with the other regiments. It's like, oh, it's a regiment of Marines that has 2 battalions. So this is a little FYI. If you see battalion and regiment, it's not interchangeable in a way, but it kind of is, because the regiments of the time are consisting of at least 1 battalion. The Americans and the British, we fill out our regiments with at least 1 battalion. There are examples of there being 2 battalion regiments. The British have that. They have their, the guards. So if you see 1 British Guard or 2 or the Guards, that's the 1st Battalion or the 2nd Battalion. So 88 Battalion Resolve or 88 Regiment Resolve. Then that's reorganizing the regiments of the Continental Army, 88 total, each depending on their states. Surprisingly, Virginia and Massachusetts, if I remember correctly, have to provide 27 regiments each. That doesn't sound right. That seems to be too much.
I mean, like Virginia, 13. They were very population dense at the time.
Yeah. Now I said it. Now I have to check.
And while you're doing that, I'll further expound on the battalion thing. The other thing with the British, you would see a battalion can be a conglomeration of companies from different regiments. So you'll have the light battalions and the grenadiers battalions. Those are the ones that are moving on Lexington Concord. Light battalions are what are putting up the defense at Germantown. And, this is just kind of going out into the ether to all 3 people who are watching us. Those battalions can also be a conglomeration of companies from different regiments. Whereas, especially in the British Army, the regiments are what are holding the tradition of the military. They're holding the tradition of their areas, or the Guards especially. So you'll have those 10 company regiments, and okay, that 10 company, that's 1 battalion. So if you have another 10 companies that are still under that same history, that's when you have a 2nd battalion of a regiment. Or, like I said, you have things like the light infantry battalions that later become light infantry regiments in the Napoleonic era. Most famous of those probably going to be the 95th and the 60th.
Yeah, the 60th, the Royal American Rifles, which had all of 4 Americans in them, all fugitives from Kentucky.
Yeah, I was going to say, most of it was Germans and Canadians.
And Yeah, so most Germans, Canadians, and some Spanish later on for some reason. Usually during the
Yeah,
Peninsula campaign.
yeah. So it's not like the Spanish would be angry with the French or anything at that point in time.
Mm-mm. It's not where we get the term guerrilla tactics.
Which
Oh, I saw it. Yeah, the magnificent gorilla, or magnificent.
undignified,
Sorry, long day.
undignified guerrilla.
Undignified.
Which I mean, in our era, you still see the same tactics used.
Yeah,
I believe it goes by the French name La Petite Guerre, the Little War,
the little
which
war.
is, I mean, effectively what guerrilla means as well.
Yeah. So that's what guerrilla means in Spanish. But I mean, over here it's more referred to as giving as Indian play. You
Mhm.
see the commanders at Kings Mountain tell their men to give them Indian play.
I'm gonna do what Luke did here, and I'm gonna go through my thing of
Your stack of manuals.
my stack of manuals that I've still got to get some of them back. Let's see, Plain Truth.
Just in time, I found the quota for regiments for the 88th Battalion Resolve was 15 each from Massachusetts and Virginia. It's interesting to note because Virginia is the largest state at the time, but Massachusetts also provides 15 regiments. 12 from Pennsylvania, 9 from North Carolina, 8 from Connecticut and Maryland, 6 from South Carolina, 4 from New York and New Jersey, 3 from New Hampshire, 2 from Rhode Island, and 1 each from Delaware and Georgia. So those are your regiments of the American Revolution. And going through the war, they actually go through a few reorganizations. I know later in the war, Virginia line gets compressed down. So that's our 88 Battalion Resolve. That's a big changing a moment. If you want to follow the trajectory of the Continental Army, Valley Forge. So they fight through Trenton and Princeton. We'd already talked about Brandywine. They lose. Brandywine is a loss, and the Americans lose Philadelphia. They lose at Germantown, and George Washington goes into his winter camp at Valley Forge. It's kind of important to I want to make a video about this. The importance of a winter camp. It's not only just the weather actually kind of gives you a timeout. If you think about like a sports game, you get like a halftime, and it's to refit, retrain, resupply, and conduct maintenance on not just men and equipment, but like the wagons to provide finances. It's really just like a downtime to really build up for the next. My brain just kind of goes to season, the fighting season that begins in the late spring and early summer. Not to say that there isn't operations that happen. Obviously, Washington goes out and fights in the winter, but 18th century armies take that time to refit, and that's when von Schlieben. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, and one of the what was the big battle? It was one of Frederick the Great's battles. Was definitely winter, and you see a lot of Northern European wars during winter. But part of it here in the continent is also logistics during winter are, pardon my French, but damn near impossible.
Yeah, because Valley Forge isn't that far from Philadelphia, where George Washington.
No, you can see Philadelphia from Valley Forge.
Yeah, especially when it starts snowing. So, real quick about the Petite Guerre. This is a book. Look up Sullivan Press if you're ever interested in getting any 18th century materials. They do great reprints, but it's military instructions for officers detached in the field, containing a scheme for forming a corps of partisans or a corps of a partisan, illustrated with plans and maneuvers necessary in carrying out the Petite Guerre by Stevenson. So I'll try to get that up in the screen. And it has wonderful diagrams of how to lay ambuscades, which nowadays we call an ambush. But it's an absolute phenomenal resource for for learning how these corps of partisans fought in the South and really into the North in that time between Monmouth and Washington's army coming south.
Well, thanks for that. I also like how it's got the period appropriate title page. Like it's a broadsheet.
Oh, I've got a bunch up here. I've actually got one that's it's a 1770 commission, and the guy who portrays Governor Tryon at Alamance, I got him to sign it for me this year as William Tryon.
So the army goes into Valley Forge. You have the Forge Wars. You have von Steuben. He comes in. He comes out with he's going to standardize and simplify the drill. We're changing over from 64 to the von Steuben drill. If you guys want to put any commentary in on that, you can feel free.
I'm sorry, I'm digging through drill manuals.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think Liam actually has my copy. That's a great book. If you watch Brandon F., he also references this one a lot.
Oh,
Systems and Management. It's Cuthbertson.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think. Does that little joker have my?
Yeah, yeah, you gave it to him at. I think you gave it to him at Alamance last year.
No. Here's my 64.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's my 64. See, it's a fairly thin book. And then now for the regulations for the order and discipline of the troops of the United States. There is what. Yeah. So what if that becomes the blue book? And then also I have like Pickering, and I think I have Thomas Symes around here somewhere. So there are a bunch of different drill manuals, and also some of these books, especially like Cuthbertson's and Symes, they're not as much drill manuals as they are how do you run an army. So North Carolina, in the 1770s, the first thing they start out with, and I can't ever prove that they went to von Steuben, but you see them ordering copies of His Majesty's 64,
Really?
and sending those out to down to captains.
Yeah.
Like they ordered 1,000 of them, and I don't remember exactly 1,000, but it was a bunch. And that's the drill that North Carolina starts the war with, and as far as I can tell, that's the drill they end the war with in militia.
So I can't find anything that's different for South Carolina. I think Virginia switches over. I think they switch over in 80, but I'm not sure. But
And I mean, effectively, a lot of the basic maneuvers are very similar.
They reduce the amount of motions in firing. That's the one that always sticks out to me. And they also do blank firing. They practice blank firing, maybe even at the battalion level.
So the British actually did that as well. And as a matter of fact, I think Cuthbertson is one of the ones that talks about it, and Symes as well. When you recruit men into the army, the first things they do are going to be, what now the modern British Army calls square bashing. So they're going to be doing close order drill, no guns. They're going to learn how to march. They're going to learn their left and their right, how to wheel, how to turn. And then you're going to give them guns, and then they're going to do that, and then you're going to do blank fire. That way, because you don't have you don't necessarily have the proliferation of arms that you have nowadays. You have these guys joining the military that were tailors or cobblers. What's the word I'm looking for? Apprentices that want to get away from this and join the army. They've never held, much less fired a gun. So it's like when this thing goes off, it's like, holy crap! That the gods from the gods of thunder have arrived, and everything's going to die. So it's like, okay, now let's desensitize these guys with blank fire, and then you move into live fire.
I'm not trying to cut it short, but I need to head out. I've got company coming in.
All right,
good.
Sounds good.
All right, see y'all later. Enjoyed it.
Again, for everyone in the live stream, if you have any questions just about 18th century Continental Army militia in general, please put those down. Kind of just working our way through the 18th century. Oh, there he goes. Kick. All right.
Technology and Ben are oftentimes. I mean, then again, technology and myself are oftentimes two totally different things. We're in two different places. It just
we started the live stream when it said going live, so I don't have to go in and make a comment to skip the first minute and a half to know if
Yeah.
we're live. So we have made, and there's no banner at the bottom, so we have made small but steady progress here at the greatest operations center.
Yeah, there's a couple more drill manuals I want to pick up, and I want to get a copy of Symes. There's one that I have actually Howell's light infantry manual up here as well. It's a distillation of what's used during the war, so it's actually printed immediately after, but it's the tactics and drill that they were using.
So if you want to talk, what's for those that don't know, what's important about Howe's light infantry manual?
So
Where's
it codifies the style of fighting from the light battalions and the light companies in the war. So it codifies how they're going to extend their order into single and double extended, how they're going to move as ranks. So you'll have front rank will move and then rear rank will move and vice versa, and they're leapfrogging across the field. And it also goes into how to maneuver in those extended orders, which are things that the regular army, that the hat companies aren't doing until they hit. Well, I would say that they aren't doing, and then they do to some extent in the South when they start to fight in open order, but they're still not getting as far apart as the light companies are. And they're meant to, they'll do things like take cover. If they come up on a fence line or on a stone wall, if that's where they're at, okay, they kneel down, they lay down behind the wall, and fire as skirmishers. So that's kind of what Howells codifies into print, is those. Part of it's the lessons learned, and part of it's the tactics they were using. And there's another one that I don't remember the name of. That's a good one from like 1779.
the von Steuben Blue Book, or that one's always pretty good, because if anyone ever tells you they, just for in general, if anyone ever tells you they didn't take aim or they didn't aim during the American Revolution, step 3 of the firing procedure says you sinking the muzzle a little below level and with the right eye looking along the barrel, and the actual command is take aim, and the next command is fire. Again,
Let me find it in the 64 here. It's okay. Let me find my 64 again. Dadgummit, I shouldn't have put it back up. That'll teach me to put things back where they belong.
if you ever have the time, definitely check out the Regulations and Disciplines of Troop of the United States by von Steuben. It's a pretty interesting read. It's not just the drill. It's not just maneuvering. It tells you how to set up a camp, where to set up a camp, how to set posts, how to swap guys out on post, stuff that is used till today. And
let's see. Yeah, present is step back about 6 inches to the rear of the right foot, bringing the left toe to the front. At the same time, the butt end of the firelock brought to an equal height with your shoulder, placing left hand on the swell and forefinger of the right hand before the trigger, sinking the muzzle a little. And then Cuthbertson and Symes talk about teaching to take, deliberate aim. And I think it's actually Cuthbertson. And it's a reenactorism that I despise. They call the front sight on a land pattern musket. They're like, oh, it's not a sight, it's a bayonet lug. And it's like, yes, it also is a bayonet lug, but if you read the parlance used at the time, that is the front sight, or that is a sight. And they are taught to take deliberate aim.
Are there still reenactors going around saying that?
Yes, there are.
I feel like that's one that was knocked out a while ago.
It's still a reenactorism that you see hanging around. It's slowly going away.
Yeah, I feel like I've only been in the hobby for 4 years now, so I feel like even when I first started, it was kind of like beaten out of you real quick. Like, it's actually fun.
And part of it is that it's like, okay, I've been doing this all 10, 11, almost 12 years now. So it's like, okay, the group that I started with, they've gotten better.
Yeah, I mean, it's just you learn with more information that hits the that comes out, and there's a ready amount of information out there from social media. Well, I don't mean social media gets such a derogative term, but like you can learn from communities.
And I mean,
Yeah.
and one thing is, it does open up a lot of resources that you may not have available, like being able to reach out to people at the Museum of the American Revolution. Social media makes that a lot easier.
Oh,
Or at various museums throughout the states, or having high resolution scans that are posted, or people able to, you kind of able to ask the hive mind, as it were, and then they can provide examples.
yeah, that's all part of the learning process. So we're gonna Valley Forge wraps up in '78. We have the Battle of Monmouth, and we'll kind of just go over there really is in the northern, the war after Monmouth turns into, there's no major engagements, right? There's no Continental Army on major British Army force. There
Yeah,
are
they're.
obviously battles. I think Stony Point happens.
Hmm.
There's some more made, but the campaign shifts south. The British are under the idea that there's more loyalists in the south. They start attacking the south, and they take Savannah. They hold Savannah, and then they go on their South Carolina campaign. The final U.S. Army organization happens in '79, or one of the last ones. They might have had one later on, '79 to '81, and Congress is just running out of money. So in the beginning of the war, I was just reading about this. When they begin the war, Congress prints a lot of money, and then they try to tie that to the pound, and then they just start printing money, and then they inflate themselves out. Then Congress is like, all right, we're no longer printing money, and then by the end of the war, the United States is going to be in financial ruin, and they're basically living off of credit streams that are provided by the French as well as the Spanish. Well, the Spanish indirectly. One of the problems that presents is that when you run out of money, you can't keep 88 regiments in the field. So the Continental Army is interesting because if you think about World War One, World War Two, the U.S. Civil War, and most American wars, it might be every American war except for this one. The U.S. military force grows and grows almost exponentially. The revolution is not that. The revolution is almost reverse. The most amount of guys are in the early to mid years, and then it drops off. And this is war weariness. The war lasts a long time. People are tired of fighting the war. People feel like they've done their part. They feel like I did my 1 year in the Continental Line. I'm back in my militia service. I don't need to go off and fight. It's somebody else's turn. And then also there's the money problems. There is months and months of time where soldiers are not being paid. And I think Joseph Plum Martin says like the only time he's paid on time is the Yorktown campaign. So financial
And
problems are plaguing the Continental Army. Well,
and
just
you also don't really need that, relatively speaking, that many troops, because you know we look at wars on the European scale are massive, and then you look at a large army, especially for the Southern campaign. Cornwallis has what, a few thousand guys, maybe
yeah.
4,000, and so you don't need a lot of people at that point in time, because you've got the Continental Army. It's got them hemmed up in New York, up north, so they're not launching out, because Washington has prepared defensive positions, and he's ready to just to wait them out. Let me see, much longer, and then and then in the South, okay, you don't need a lot of army, relatively speaking, to move and to do what needs to be done. The militia comes into their own in the South because of, you know, the British Army doesn't have any control. They don't have any control over anything. And, when they try to rise up their men, Cornwallis tells the loyalists in North Carolina, don't conglomerate, or no, don't congregate, because we need you on your farms. Well, they do it anyways. They get absolutely shellacked at the Battle of Ramsar's Mill over in Lincolnton, and you don't really have that stream of loyalists coming in. So Cornwallis's army is kept fairly small, And then you have, the second, another attempt at this. Ferguson's going into the backcountry. He's raising militia. On his last ill-fated expedition and doing that, he's absolutely stomped out at Kings Mountain, which is just, a few miles down the road from my house. And that's that's more of what you see in the South, is because that army stays so small. You don't need many regular troops, especially when you're, in a battle in South Carolina. We can call them the South Carolina Militia. They'll gladly fight in South Carolina. You get to North Carolina, we'll call them the North Carolina Militia. They'll gladly fight North Carolina, or, close to the borders. And you know, and then even in Camden, you see Virginians and North Carolinians down there, and the Virginians, of course, take flight. And they do redeem themselves later at Guilford Courthouse by standing, and the North Carolinians do their job, and they're like, "Peace, y'all, we're out."
So for tracking purposes, at the Battle of Camden, the left flank of the American force was made up of militia, and that fell apart, and the Virginians ran. But at Guilford Courthouse, they were threatened they would be shot if they ran. So that might, I think his name was
Yeah, that's
Lincoln
that.
Stevens. He's
When
like,
I
I will
say
shoot a
you
man that runs.
Yeah, if you know you run and will be shot, or you stand and may be shot is better than will be.
They fought a little bit. They fought better at Guilford Courthouse. I feel like as an adopted, one of my many adopted states, Virginia I'll have to throw that in. So the reforms drops the army down from 80 regiments to 50 regiments. The companies are reduced. They start bringing in novel ideas at the time. So in Rhode Island, it would be hard pressed not to bring up the Rhode Island regiment, infantry regiment, and that was made up of, I think. Let's do that. If you guys don't know this story, there's a great book called Standing in Their Own Light that covers Black American war veterans, or Black American Continental Army veterans. And it's the first Rhode Island, and it was a black regiment, and it was a mix of what had been slaves that were promised freedom if they fought through the war. And from the best of my recollection, they were all given freedom, even though some of the masters tried to go back on the deal, and Washington said there'd be nothing worse than offering a man his freedom than that. So there was an integrated army. The Continental Army was integrated from about 1776 all the way through the end of the war. And that's kind of unique in American history, because they don't desegregate the army until 1947 with Truman. So that's your fun Continental Army fact. And again, Standing in Their Own Light, go read that book. It's made up of lots of primary sources from a lot of pensions, because a lot of these black veterans would submit to the War Office for pensions in the 18 teens, and they were able to actually receive their pensions. So obviously there's a lot of stuff in history. History is nuanced, but so that's kind of just to exemplify, towards the end of the war, they're trying to bring in more people to fill out the ranks, try to expand. There's a lot of foreigners that are involved. There's a lot of, just trying to fill out infantry regiments is generally just what I'm trying to say. That's the later war. Arms and equipment. This is when, in 1776, before we had even sent our first, before we even sent Silas Deane and then Benjamin Franklin over to France, the French were already open to helping us out. They had already approved to send a couple million livres, and they start providing arms in 76, but more so 77, 78, 79, 80. And that is French muskets from the models of 1763 all the way to models of 1774. Story for another day. It's something I've covered, and it's part of my long-term project. But the French do provide at least 100,000 guns. We don't know what the extent of that is. They made about 400,000, but we have at least documented 100,000 of those guns arriving by ship. You can expect some of those guns were lost at sea, and weren't able to make it over. But it's pretty cool that we
then you have a lot that are captured at Charleston.
Yeah, a
So,
lot there captured in Charleston,
uh,
and they have enough of them that the militia at Guilford Courthouse they are armed. Some of them are, at least I've read accounts, are
and
armed with
Kings Mountain as
and
well.
things.
So some of the militia that were with Ferguson and were armed with captured guns. So some of those guns get recaptured at Kings Mountain. Um, man, I've loved the chat. I've got to start wrapping it up because it's supper time here on the East Coast, and it's Sunday night, so I usually go out with the family and eat supper. So yeah, I need to start trying to wrap it up, and we can jump in later at another point in time, and pick up where we left off and finish off the war and some of the tactics, the challenges of the war and stuff like that. We can hop in later and do that one of these days.
Perfect, man. Yeah, let's do that. If anyone has any comments, you can leave it. I'll hang out with you for a little bit more. But we'll end with what I kind of wanted to start with, but I never got around to it. We'll end with I put up a poll question. Thought experiment, put yourself in their shoes. It's the fall of 1775 without knowing how the war will go. What duration of time would you sign up for in the Continental Army? So I had 125 people vote. I appreciate that. 60% said 1 year. 11% said 2 years, 2% said 3 years, and 27% said the duration of the war. And I found that pretty interesting because that kind of ties into that's actually a good way to wrap up this live stream. That kind of ties a nice bow about what we talked about from the beginning. Like, would you have served? He's like, yeah, there's a lot of things going on for me to up and leave my home and homestead for, the farm and my family and leaving them unprotected, especially if they're on the frontier. So it's kind of interesting to see that even to today, I know it's just a simple poll online, but you can see that, yeah, I could give a year. I could do this. You don't know how the war is going to end, but you could do a
Mhm.
year. Or you're a true believer, which is a smaller percentage, and it's, the duration of the war. But what's interesting is that people are not, even in today's mindset, thinking back like 2, 3 years. I don't know what's going to happen. What if I completely waste my time? Generalization, but if you want to have any closing thoughts on that, Andy, and then yeah, we'll have a part two.
Um, yeah, closing thoughts on it is, and like you said, kind of how we started at the beginning. A lot of these guys that, you know, yeah, you can see 1 year, and especially if they're laborers, they're in town. And it's like, okay, well, I'm going from steady work to steady work. I should be getting paid. I'll take that chance. Or nowadays you look at it and go, I'll take that chance on that startup. And because that's effectively what it is. It's a startup nation building edition, and they can go ahead and afford that. Whereas these guys, where they're farmers, their livelihood depends on them being there and them working in the fields, and it's not even steady income today, much less in the 18th century, because a bad crop can very near destroy you as a person, and a lot of people it did. Because not only does it mean you don't have money, now it means you don't have food. You can't run down to the Walmart or the Piggly Wiggly and get you some stuff. Get you some bread and milk. When it snows, you have to have all of this food there. So, and I think that's part of the reason you do see the militia service being a thing in the South is you see, yeah, but say somebody popped in here, so I put 1 year. Reason was crops come is that crops back home don't pick themselves, and you see that especially amongst the more rural parts of compared to today, it's all rural, but the more rural parts of the country is they have to be there for not only their survival, their family survival, and the survival of the people around them.
What's up, Hatfield McCoy, fellow Marine? I think it was infantry when I was in Afghanistan. But no, that's a perfect way to put it. I know it kind of like hammering that simple point down, but yeah, at the end of the day, it's the economics do make an impact on you. So that's why you see the day laborers and even to today, like what kind of people enlist into your younger people, 18, 19, 20 in
That's
general.
it. And
Again,
nowadays,
generalization.
yeah, nowadays in the military, you don't have to worry as much about the infrequency of pay.
Yeah. we would have we don't have to worry about much. Whenever I read about, like, especially the race to the Dan, I'm like, that sounds like a Navy SEAL Hell Week, like times a month, where they're sleeping and marching 15 to 25 miles a day, sleeping in the rain. They're not getting
I've
warm food.
I've done that march once. We did part of the recreated march, and I know we don't venture into 19th century in this channel a lot, but we did the recreated march from Harper's Ferry to Dunker Church to recreate Hill's Corps before the Battle of Sharpsburg. And yeah, that I thought my feet were going to fall off. That was 20 some odd miles.
Yeah, especially
And
with those old shoes.
that was miserable. So, yeah, we like to go out and do it on the weekends, and we try to incorporate some of those things into our lives, but we will never truly grasp the magnitude of what these men were.
Yeah. True
You know,
believers too. For imagine going months and months and months without being paid. Like that's just you're out getting paid. You're not getting very good food. You're like you have casualties from people getting sick and dying off. It's just a amount of work that it's just hard to really take into account. That reenacting, you get we get a touch of it, but we even after it just puts you in their shoes and you respect it a little bit more. It's very fun. I was gonna find. I was reading about the French when they went down to Yorktown, how they broke up moving an army because they moved the army from Connecticut all the way down to Yorktown. They start the march
mhm.
in mid-June, and how they scheduled it is super interesting. So, how do you move an 18th century army of five? At that point, it's like 5 or 6 thousand men, and they have staggered step offs. So they step
Mhm.
off, and they also start marching at like 3 in the morning, and they're done at like noon. And then they
Mhm.
set up camp, and they have some food, and you go to bed early. You're marching anywhere from 15 to 20 miles a day with 60 pounds of gear. And they're doing that from June all the way until they start throwing in the siege lines, which is early October. They're marching um, every day basically for that amount.
Let's
And
say,
if you
and then
think about it, you can make go ahead.
and then once you stop marching, congratulations, now you get to start digging.
Now you've made it to the battle. But it was a great breakdown that I read that talked about the French, how they made that movement. Also, they had different regiments who take different roads. So
Mhm.
maybe the Gatineau regiment will take off at 2, and they'll take this road, and then the Royal Dupont or whatever they'll take off
Mhm.
later, and they'll take another road, and ahead of them are going to be your cartographers, your engineers, and they're going to make sure that they have correct maps, make sure the bridges are up, so that way the infantry can just cross the bridge. So if you think about a large, like it's kind of like dripping down from the north, is how I imagine this
And
army moving across. And that's a long drive. Connecticut to Virginia, that's already like a 10-hour drive.
then you have that idea basically gets kind of perfected by a man I loathe to give any credit to, but it gets perfected by Napoleon and his corps being able to basically disassemble his army, send them along various routes of march, and have them all reassemble exactly where he wants them when he wants them. That's effectively what the French are doing is they're disassembling their army so you're not putting the strain on the roads, the road network that's well frankly non-existent, the areas you're passing through, if you need to forage for supply, okay, cool, the front of your column can eat food, now the rear of the column has nothing if you're marching all in one thing. So, ultimately they're wonderful logistical decisions to disassemble and then reassemble your army.
And then you have your wagons per company. I was reading about that. The Wagon Corps,
Hmm.
I think there was in supplying Washington's army by Erna Risch. It's been a whole chapter talking about wagons, but they brought wagons down to the company level. It kind of reminded me of World War II. They had jeeps at company level. The U.S. Army
Hmm.
did, right, for heavy weapons and equipment that would be needed at the company level. So you see a little bit of that in the American Revolution, in which they have at the company level. And some of these regiments are only I think I sent you this on Facebook when we were talking. Like the size of a regiment in the Yorktown campaign. There's like 150 men to
Yeah, you might
300.
have 150 to 300 guys.
Yeah, and the regiment should be 600 to 700 men by that time in the war. So
And
150
and
guys.
and I mean that definitely continues through. You see that into the to the late unpleasantness, as it were, in the 1860s, where you have the 26th North Carolina marches into Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, July the 1st, or let's see, the last day of June. July the 1st, they start the day with 1,000 men. They're the largest regiment in the Confederate Army, and they end the third day with about a 96% casualty rating, including all basically the cadre, the core of their officer corps. You have entire companies of men that started out at 100 plus men are able to muster a sergeant and 3 privates at the end of the battle.
Wow.
So it's definitely attrition that happens over time, that you see these regiments starting large, and through lack of money, lack of resources, lack of supply, and attrition of men being lost in battle, invalided out of the army, and all kind of stuff. That's why you see these regiments so small.
Seeing the conversation about dysentery.
Yeah, but so I see somebody talking about dysentery, and
Hatfield,
I've had
dysentery got us in Iraq during the invasion. Sounds. Were you in a track?
I've had a few things that are roughly equivalent to dysentery, including a case of hepatitis.
Oh
I
God.
don't remember which one's the one that goes away. I don't remember, but either way, I had that, which is, I can, from what I was reading, was roughly equivalent. That was a miserable 2 weeks. Had it not been for the aid of modern medicine and the ability to go get Gatorade, I would have not have survived that one.
And this all ties back into the Blue Book. Regulates camp latrines. So if you
Hmm.
ever want to know, it's really not just the drill; it's how to run an 18th century army. So Hatfield McCoy and Florida Seminole War History. If you ever, and the NBC. Ugh.
Oh,
You invaded a desert country in green uniforms. Florida Seminole War History. Good to see you, man. Hopefully have you on soon in October and November. We'll have a live stream. We'll talk about Florida in the American Revolution. I was calling it the 14th colony, the story of the 14th colony and the Battle Siege of Pensacola.
and let's say just one more quick random fact of I remember hearing doing research for the 100th anniversary of World War One back. Oh Lord, it's been a while now. But it seems that World War One is possibly the first war where you have more casualties and deaths due to enemy action than you do to disease. To put that into perspective, like I see here, of 1,466 documented deaths in the Second Seminole War, 328 were battle related. So it's disease wreaks havoc on armies in this era, and with the aid of modern medicine, much less so nowadays. But it's still unavoidable in large scale conflict.
And they had surgeons at the regimental level during the war. I wonder
Hmm.
if I'm not going to lie, I have not really spent too much time looking at the medical aspects of 18th century because I'm
I,
not
I
interested, and that's
Yeah,
probably
I
why a
don't know
lot
a
of
lot about it.
yeah.
All right, man. It's been a great time with you. I've got to duck out to go to supper.
Hey, no problem, man. We'll have a part two of this.
Yep.
Take care.
All right. Peace out, man.
See you. Now I guess it's just me. I've never done my own lonesome live stream. Oof. We had a lieutenant colonel in the Florida National Guard who died from some weird bug in Afghanistan. Oh, I'll let him know. Hatfield, he's out. And I got sick from drinking chai in Afghanistan 2011 and spent the last week on an outpost before I went home. So I think it's universal. You just pick up some weird stuff over there in country. 14th and 15th. Oh, because Eastern Florida was its own colony and Western Florida was its own colony. Okay. I have started readings on the I've been starting my Pensacola stuff, learning about Pensacola. Hatfield, I am currently, for you there, Hatfield McCoy. So I got 2 videos I'm working on right now. One of them is Siege of Pensacola, but my primary video right now is the Continental Marines in the history, the first year. So 1775, what's going on with the Continental Marine Corps. And I'm learning a lot of stuff about how we were lied to in boot camp. Mexican War had something like 11,000 casualties and 90% disease. Yeah, it's just a brutal way to fight. Supplying Washington's Army by Erna Risch. She had a whole chapters on the medical establishment. Something I just haven't really looked into. Oh, thanks, man. I appreciate that. The working on it right now. I'll just kind of let you in on a little bit of the fun stuff I've picked up. One of the coolest things is that we always get read about the 2 battalions of Marines. That's 1 regiment. For some reason, I always got in my head, it's 2 battalions of Marines. They only, which is the equivalent of 1 regiment of 2 battalions. Back in the war, they would usually have 1 battalion per regiment, but the Marine Corps got 2 battalions per regiment. The Marine Corps only actually, well, it's not the Marine Corps yet. The Continental Marines has, Continental Marines is able to put together 5 companies in December of 1775. I know what their firearms, I was able to find out what firearms they had, what kind of gear they had, and what kind of uniforms they had, and where they got said firearms, said gear, and said uniforms, and why they have said uniforms. So the first uniform was there was no uniform. They didn't have any money for it. But Captain Samuel Nicholas, oh yeah, I was ecstatic the other day. So Captain Samuel Nicholas was part of the Gloucester Fox Hunting Club, and he wore, as part of this club, they wore green uniforms. So he was recruiting in green uniforms. He was a proprietor at Tun Tavern. There was another tavern that was, I think it was owned or operated by another Marine called the Conestoga Wagon. So there's actually potentially 2 birthplaces of the Marine Corps because both of those taverns recruited Marines. I'll have to check that out. Seminole War history. So there's the 2 birth places of the Marine Corps. I'll cover the weapons real quick because I need someone to talk about this because I found it. So provincial arms. Since we're in Philadelphia, they were provided provincial arms. What is a provincial arm? We don't really know, but it's the guns that were in storage in Philadelphia would be handed over to the Continental Navy and then the Continental Marines. So it is going to be a pin fastened smoothbore flintlock musket, much in the style of a Longland pattern musket, commonly known as a brown bess. So we know that. Uniforms. There is no uniforms until September of 1776. That's when they get the green uniform with the white facings. That is the first official Marine Corps uniform. But there was at least Captain Samuel Nicholas. It's thought that they wore green in 1775 and green in 1776. Great question. How large was the U.S. Marine Corps during the Revolutionary War? That's a trick question. The United States Marine Corps doesn't exist. The Continental Marine Corps, I'm sorry, it's semantics. The Continental Marine Corps is about 2,000 enlisted men. I think it's like 300 officers total. They have a direct number on officers. Let me see in my notes. I'll have to find it again. I have so much stuff. Okay, so about 200 to 300 officers, 2,000 enlisted. They are able to get their arms. Yeah, so Longland would be a Longland style of best musket would be appropriate, or provincial arms. They say stocks of provincial arms. Not only do they provide the stocks of provincial arms, but the Pennsylvania Committee of Public Safety provides accoutrements, and so the accoutrements would be your cartridge box. They say bayonets. So your cartridge box and bayonets. Some Marines are thought to have worn, like the enlisted Marine, wore green shirts. So they would wear a green shirt. The officers would wear like a green regimental, a wool green regimental. But there might have been enlisted in the green and white. So I was able to find that. So if you read the official resolve that 2 battalions of Marines be raised, consisting of 1 colonel, 2 lieutenant colonels, 2 majors, and other officers as usual in other regiments. And they consist of a number of privates with other battalions, that particular care be taken, that no persons be appointed to office or enlisted into said battalions, but such as are good seamen or have been acquainted with maritime affairs as to be able to serve to the advantage by sea when required. The average height was 5'6", the shortest man was 5'3", the tallest man was 6 foot. This is all going to come out in the video, but I thought it'd be fun to talk about. Here we go. They had men that were Irish, English, German, Swiss, and Dutch. They worked, and they kind of did trade, like lower, they were entry-level trade jobs, some trade jobs, day laborers, but there's carpenters, coopers, jewelers, masons, wool combers, laborers, and even 1 doctor. Yeah, the United States Marine Corps was tiny. So they were authorized to have a regiment in the American Revolution. So a regiment would be ran by a colonel, 2 battalions, and 1 regiment. Captain Samuel Nicholas makes it to major, and that's what the war ends at. So it takes a while for them to hit that colonel. I think Archibald Henderson might be the first colonel, but yeah, the Marine Corps. So the Continental Marine Corps disbands in 1783. So the green uniforms for the Continental Marines wear green and white. So the first year of the war, they have no standard uniform. In September of 1776, they get a green regimental with white facings. In 1779, they get a green uniform with red facings. And that's how they end the war. Then, when the United States Marine Corps was brought back in the late 1790s, they have a blue uniform. And they have a blue uniform all the way until Andrew Jackson in the 1830s. In the 1830s, President Andrew Jackson wants to go back to the original colors of the Continental Marines. So he goes and tells all of his men to bring in and start wearing green again. So the United States Marine Corps this is more of your era, Florida Seminole, like they're supposed to be starting to wear green again. The officers hate it, so Archibald Henderson doesn't like it because he says that the green fades too much. Hatfield McCoy, you should see that, because even in today's environment, look how quickly your green camis faded in comparison to the deserts. I mean, the deserts ones turned out looking like snow camis, but like the greens faded too quickly on the ships. So they were told that's what they're changing to. And then they went back to blue, and then that kind of leads on to today where you have the dress blues. But the dress blues can kind of trace their heritage more or less back to the late 1790s. But the Continental Marines are going to be wearing green. They're going to be armed with land pattern. But then things get a little bit out of whack. So the original guns they have are these provincial arms. They have 5 companies of Marines that are raised. Of the 20 companies, because each regiment is 10 companies. Speaking too fast. Each battalion is 10 companies. There's 1 regiment, so there's 20 companies total. The Marine Corps only has 5 companies that set sail for the Bahamas. As late as December of 1775, they have a Continental Navy document saying to confiscate guns for the ships about to head out. So the Continental Navy gives the approval, or asks for, or whatever, to go out into Philadelphia and Pennsylvania and confiscate guns, provide the owner with some money, and be like, hey, we need these real quick. And then those are the guns that they're going to take. So even though there's only 5 companies of Marines, assuming that some Navy sailors came to ashore as well, they had to confiscate guns. Company being about 400 men are on that first expedition. I'm only really focusing Green dye did not hold. Yeah. And green dye was, I can't remember. I don't have my books next to me. I've been reading about this. But so I'm only covering the first year of 75, leading up to why is there a Marine Corps? What is their purpose? History of Marines in general. So what does a Marine of the 18th century do? Well, I'll just kind of give you a little, does a couple things. So on land, you could, well, most importantly, Marines allow for power projection, allows the Navy to have a little bit more of a reach. Marines can raid coastal towns or outposts. They could seize vital positions and destroy enemy supplies. They could also be dropped ashore, and they could be used to storm enemy harbor fortifications. This is what they do in the Bahamas. So instead of bringing your ships and having your ships engage forts, you could drop Marines off somewhere and they could flank the fort and capture it. That's what they do in the Bahamas. That's what actually they do in the Barbary Wars. And they can support Allied armies on land campaigns, is what they do at Princeton, where you put the Marines ashore and they are now just an independent. They're infantry. They're just naval infantry. But Marines also have that ability on ship. They also man cannons. So they have that cannon manning ability, and they are trained to fight with cannons. So a little bit more of a versatile force. Yeah, Army. You know what messes with my mind is the Army organization. You guys have brigades and battalion. You have a second battalion of a 4th brigade of a 30th division, and there's no other battalions. It's my brain. The Marine Corps is just 1, 2, 3 regiment battalions per regiment. 1st Marine Regiment, 3 battalions. 2nd Marine Regiment, 3 battalions. I wish the Army would go back to the old triangle side, because the Army's battalions and brigades, because the Marine Corps doesn't use brigades. They use MEBs, Marine Expeditionary Brigades, but it's not quite the same. Sorry, Florida Seminole War history. I think the Army should just go back to 1940s style of organization. Yeah, it's ridiculous. The 25th what is it? Let's look at the organization. 25th Infantry Division. Org chart. How do I... Oh. Share screen. I'll do that later. If you look at the 25th Infantry Division, it's just all right, 2nd Light Brigade as the 1st. 3rd Infantry Brigade. So they have a 2nd Light Brigade, but they don't have a 1st Light Brigade. They don't have a 1st anything. They have a 3rd Infantry Brigade. They have the 1st Battalion of the 21st Infantry Regiment, 1st Battalion of the 27th Infantry Regiment. Here, I'll drop this comment so you two can follow along. Hopefully that goes. I'm just looking at 25th Army Infantry Regiment. 2nd Battalion, 27th, 2nd Battalion, 35th. So 1st and 2nd Battalion, the 27th Infantry Regiment, aren't even in the same brigade. I think it's because it's for when they have to grow bigger. But yeah, no. But the brigade stuff. So in the Continental Army, you have your battalions, which is interchangeable with regiments, more or less, and then your regiments are in a brigade. So if you think about it, a brigade is because it has a brigadier general. Brigadier general is now in charge of multiple regiments. Multiple brigades is a division. Think about if you divide something up, that is your. This is also for me to remember how it's organized, because 18th century organization is something I'm working on. So you can division or wing, that would be like your lieutenant general, and he's in charge of that. No, major general. So major general being in charge of a division, which is kind of similar to what we have today. Also, ship to ship, back to the Continental Marines, or Marines man to topsails, so they'd be firing down on enemy decks, picking off enemy officers, sailors and gun crews and creating chaos before the boarding actions. Marines would also be part of those boarding actions, armed with axes, pistols, and muskets. And I would assume blunderbusses as well. I haven't been able to find that. And what's interesting about that is you can find brass barreled blunderbusses, semi-open, like original ones or reproduction ones. And a blunderbuss is just a hand cannon. But yeah, you can find boarding axes. Not much. They are issued bayonets, according to what I read. But bayonets on a ship, that's just interesting. Obviously, they had them. Makes sense. Have a pokey thing at the end of your musket. It's good to have. And then Marines also man the cannons. So on your ship-to-ship engagement, you'd have Marines in the topsails shooting down, or they could be on the deck. And we have to remember that in 18th century warfare, the goal isn't to sink the enemy ship. The goal is to capture it. So you bring down its sails, and then you can move aboard, capture the ship, stop the enemy from scuttling. I don't. Somebody with experience with modern day Army organization would have to explain it. I think that the reason that the Army uses like the 1st Battalion of 27th Infantry and the 1st Battalion of 25th Infantry is for surge capacity. So they have like the parent unit and to keep the lineage alive so that that way they could make like a 2nd Battalion and a 3rd Battalion. But it's not something I know quite a lot about. I don't know much about anything, honestly. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that transfers over from the modern military to the 19th century and to the 18th. So sailors would have their own gun crews. Great question. The cannons were sailors, but Marines would have their own cannons on certain ships sometimes, is the best way to say that. And Marines manned their own guns on naval vessels all the way through World War II. Because if you go, it may be into the 89. Because if you look at the Iowa class battleships, like the Wisconsin, one of those, I think it's a 5-inch gun, has a Marine detachment. The Marines run that gun on the battleship. So Marines are providing like security as well as they're manning their own guns all the way up until the 20th century. But in general, the guns, I think on a ship it's called a gun, on land it's called a cannon, but the guns are manned by sailors. Yeah. So Marines have experience with cannons. So that means when they, not all, but you'd have some Marines with experience. And then when you come to shore, those Marines that operated a cannon on a ship can now operate the cannons on shore, or you could have Marines on batteries on land on fortifications to defend harbors. So you can see that. And Marines do that in World War II at the Battle of Wake Island. You have Marines that are manning like anti-ship batteries, and they actually sink a Japanese destroyer, and maybe a submarine the Marine aviators sink a submarine. And then Marines ensure discipline. I was talking to my friend Nick Erickson that works at the Sullivan's Brother Museum, because Marines really come around in the 17th, 18th, and 19th century. And if you think about it, the European powers that have them, the Dutch, the British, the French, the Spanish, having a contingent of loyal men that are armed on your ships, your sailing ships that go to sea for months at a time is probably a good thing when there's such high rates of mutiny, or at least there is a chance of having a mutiny. The ship goes to sea for 6-7 months. You want to have someone to put down mutinies. And when you show up someplace, you want to have guys to disembark the ship and go to shore. So like the almost, you could say like the modern iteration of the Marine Corps really ties itself to the age of sail. Ships go to sea for a long time. They show up on some far land, and then they head to shore to conduct raids. They also protect the captains. In boot camp, I'm sure. I mean, that was like my only experience with Marine Corps history was boot camp, and they're just like, yeah, they protected the ship's captains from mutiny. True, but they're there for a reason, right? Like, why hasn't ships always had it? Well, because you're at sea for a long time. Something I kind of put to my head. We didn't have coffee breaks in the Army because we would have to retrain afterwards. Oh, that's unfortunate. Ah, okay. Yeah. Second Seminole War had them garrison forts. Yep. I don't want to go. I'll go grab my book real quick. I'll be right back. All right. This has been my go-to. The U.S. Marine Corps, 1775 to 1859. It's by Ron Field, illustrated by Adam Hook. And it's got some, my favorite part, so there's lots of pictures. I've marked it up quite a bit. So these enlisted guys are in the 1779 uniform update. Officers, if I remember correctly, they always had the green with the white facings. 1779, the Marine Corps goes to green with red facings. And he has a French gun. Oh, I also forgot. So the Marines that served with the Bonhammer Shard had red uniforms because they were part of the Wild Geese. The Wild Geese were Irish Catholics that fought for the French, and they actually filled out the Marine contingent on the Bonhammer Shard for John Paul Jones. So Marines actually wore red. Love that. Yeah, the Osprey books are so good, and there's so much good information in here. Talk about guns. So the Continental Marines were initially issued with whatever arms were available, whether captured or acquired. It would probably have been the British 75 caliber Longland Brown Bess flintlock musket. Also issued was the 75 caliber Sea Service pattern musket. It was easier. You wanted to have a shorter barrel in maneuvering on the ships. They were replaced with the 1766, what we call Charleville French lock Marine, the Charleville Marine flintlock musket. Marine because it has brass fittings. I think we talked about this, Florida Seminole. And these were guns that were French, that were purchased from France. You want to have brass fittings, better at sea. They had carried 24 rounds on them. Yeah, so this covers that. Where's more pictures of the... I know there's another picture to show the first iteration of the blue uniforms. So here's the first blue ones. They're blue with wings and red. But yeah. So look out for that video coming around the Marine Corps birthday. I plan on this to be one of my... I want this one to be a good one. So I've already, it's September and I've already started working on the script. I'm collecting images. I'm trying to do a lot so that I can give a good 10 to 15 minute overview of the basically standing up the Marine Corps in 1775. So look forward to that. I'm gonna take off and go for a run. Thank you so much for hanging out with me and jump in. But yeah, guys, thanks so much. And we'll have Andy and Ben on again, and we'll kind of finish out the Continental Army. If you have any questions, just leave it. Comment on the video if you want us to cover some stuff. Like, this is obviously not a professional ran operation, so I'm just trying to see what you guys like hearing about and stuff like that. All right, take care, brother. See you there, Florida, and we'll have a live stream here in the fall here, hopefully soon. But till next time, guys, take care.